Welcome. I'm going to do a multi-part video series today about to be sort of a beginner's guide for Conquest Enhanced to try and give newer players to the mod a little bit of a crash course in what to expect when you pick it up for the first time, sort of how does it change from vanilla, and maybe some sort of high-level discussion on some strategies that you can employ, some tactics that you can employ in the actual battles, and then also some macro level tips on mission selection and how to spend your research points, how to progress the tech tree, and what have you. I'm going to set it up by first talking about the changes from the vanilla game. So I'm just going to go through, I'm going to jump over to the Steam Workshop page and just go through the change list just to highlight all of the differences. And then we're going to come back into the game and start up a campaign as the Soviets against Germany, and we're probably going to let it run for the first 6 days or so, just to sort of get going out of the early game. Not going to do some sort of crazy early game focused strategy, just for the sake of getting through the first couple of days. But for me, when I was first starting out in Conquest Enhanced, the beginning is the most difficult part. I mean, it took me so many tries just to get past the very first defense mission, and I think there are some bad habits that you form playing. Hopefully, I can give a little bit of feedback on my experience and hopefully give you a little bit of an easier transition into Conquest Enhanced, because it is a lot more difficult than the vanilla game, but the difficulty and the variation makes it that much more fun. So we're going to jump over real quick to the Steam Workshop page, and I'm just going to go through the mod change list. If you already are familiar, you can go ahead and skip over that part, and we'll come right back to the screen to set up the campaign. Alright, so we're on the CE Mod Steam Workshop page. I'm just going to go through the change list that's listed here. So a lot of new features. I'm not going to go through a ton of these because there are just some interesting new things that the mod adds about additional emplacements, additional off-map call-ins, fortifications that the engineers can bring, vehicle fortifications, integration of the auto medic mechanic, which I believe is an independent mod that you can use separately, which allows your medics to auto heal. You have chat wheel commands now for auto healing, auto resupply, teleporting your units to the middle of the map, which is really helpful on defense. Changing the weather, which is really helpful on certain maps. For me, I hate playing the ones that have the really bright, blinding snow. For whatever reason, it just doesn't work super well. But anyway. Additional units as well. They've added some stuff here, so I'm not going to go through all this. The stuff that they add is just purely adds. I really want to talk more about the changes from the vanilla game. So if I start from the let's see. Let's do the new AI features. So the AI does behave differently than the vanilla game. I think that's something that the base Call to Arms really leaves something to be desired with the AI behavior. In general, in Conquest Enhanced, the AI is more challenging and also a little bit more dynamic. There's this first point here about the 15 different divisions. So basically what this means is that the AI will have different army compositions that it will throw at you each time, which is very neat. It keeps it interesting and varied from map to map. They get the same amount of like overall army size, which scales with your army, but it does change from mission to mission. It does not allow you to sort of over specialize at one particular thing. Yeah, so a few other things. They have some off-map call-in abilities. This is more significant later in the war, later in the campaign, I should say. They get more of these capabilities. They'll bring in airstrikes. They'll bring in an artillery signaler, which is more challenging, of course. They will also recrew emplacements and vehicles, which is really interesting and neat. They will even recruit your own vehicles if you let them fall into their hands, which you obviously want to avoid. And then they also use smoke grenades, which is also I don't think is part of the vanilla behavior of infantry. So it does add an additional challenge in that regard. But the main thing is that they will move in different ways. They actually will come from different angles. They will flank you. They will send attacks at your position from different directions at the same time, which is interesting and more challenging to deal with. They'll end up behind you, and you'll go, I have no idea how this squad of infantry ended up behind. So it's stuff that you need to be aware of. But it makes the game less. It makes it more challenging, but it also makes it more dynamic, and it acts more like you would expect a opposition army force to behave, not just sending units straight at you down the middle of the map, which maybe is an overgeneralization of how the vanilla AI is encoded, but it is what it is. Also, some new maps that were added here. I'm not going to go into that, and I already mentioned the additional units previously. So, I did talk already about the AI armies. It does change a little bit from attack to defense. On attack, it's probably is the most deviation from the vanilla game, because they will actually send units after you. They don't just sit back. They get emplacements, which is actually, I guess now is in part of the vanilla game. It wasn't before Liberation, I believe. So they actually get emplacement support units to defend the cap points. Which is interesting. They'll bring in artillery units, which can be very challenging to deal with. They'll have when I say that, not off-map artillery, but they actually bring in like an artillery piece to as a unit rather than as a call-in. So it's more challenging in that regard on attack. On defense, like I said earlier, they're gonna attack you from different directions. The one caveat, or not caveat, but the one thing that the mod does do that is a differentiator from vanilla as well is that from the beginning of the mission you see the arrows on the map where the enemy will come from. So it does give you that information to work with. Another thing that is changed from the vanilla, and I completely actually forgot about this, that you can call in all of your units at once, and that's not a feature that's part of the base game. I always thought that was kind of strange that you couldn't do that, but that's been changed in Conquest Enhanced. You can call in all 5 stages of your units if you have it right now. Sorry, up front, and you don't have to wait for your command points to trickle in. I think that's what they're called. Possibly the most impactful gameplay change for Conquest Enhanced is the reduction in infantry health. For reference, the vanilla infantry squads, I believe, have between 160 and 220 health, depending on the veterancy of the unit and the tier, the tiered units, so tier 1 to 5, so elite infantry versus basic infantry. In Conquest Enhanced, normal sort of tier 2 rifle squad infantryman has only 80 health, so it's much more deadly for infantry. They will, if you sneeze on them with a high explosive shell, they die. So it makes engagements more deadly for infantry. On the contrast, if that's applied to both your units and the enemy units. So it's not just a one-way change there. You do have better accuracy against, or sorry, worse accuracy against units in cover. So it is more important that your infantry is in cover versus out in the open. And I'll get to this in the next point, but infantry is still very much a core part of your army. Just because they're weaker doesn't mean that their influence is not there. I don't want to give that impression off. There is also a slider in the campaign setup screen, which we'll see later, that actually allows you to toggle this on or off or have a varying level of it. So the Conquest Enhanced health setting can be adjusted back to sort of closer to vanilla. I think it's in 4 increments. If you're really struggling with the game, that's probably the most straightforward way for you to notice an incremental change that makes it a little bit easier for you, because not only does it affect your infantry squads, but it does affect your weapon teams as well. So you can lose a whole AT gun crew, to one round if you're not careful. And the impact of all of this is that infantry they're still key, but they're no longer bullet sponges like they are sort of in the base game. You really have to use them a little bit smarter, and your vehicles then become a little bit more important by comparison. But because of the cost changes I'm going to talk about in the next section, that is balanced a little bit. Let me make sure I got everything here. Oh, the bleed out timer here, which is if your unit gets downed so it can be healed by a medic, that time is significantly increased, so you do have time to get medics there. Adjustment a little bit of the timing and the ticket drain on offense and on defense. And okay, so so we'll go to the next point, which is probably the second biggest change, or most notable, impactful change in Conquest Enhanced, is how the cost is rebalanced between the various unit types from the vanilla game. So if I remember correctly, when you play Vanilla Conquest, the most efficient units and effective units to use based on cost and population cap efficiency were always tanks and infantry. If you have, there was, AT guns costed the same pop cap wise or slightly less than a tank. Well, in Conquest Enhanced, that is changed significantly to where both the manpower cost and the population cost of various units have been adjusted. So I said earlier that infantry is significantly weaker. Well, the population cap cost is also cut in half. So they cut their health in half, they cut the population cost in half, and they cut the manpower cost in half. So they're cheaper to bring onto the field now, and you can have a larger amount of them, but they just have less health. Tanks are pretty much unchanged, but they are standardized across the board as far as population cap goes for the most part. Light tanks are usually 15 pop cap, medium tanks are 25, and heavy tanks are 35, regardless of era, with some caveats in there. Let's see, tank destroyers are around 20 pop cap, and this is regardless of era too, for the most part. Artillery is usually around 30, so I think that's higher than in the base game. All the self-propelled guns, or sort of self-propelled adjacent, so like the one I'm thinking of right offhand is the BT-7A or the Su-26, which is not really categorized as an SPG. It's not on the artillery tree, but it's sort of plays like one. Those have been adjusted as well. They're to reflect their effectiveness. Also, light vehicles like half tracks and armored cars are more competitively priced. So what this means is, overall, you get a lot more unit variety, which is, to me, the most interesting part of playing Conquest Enhanced. Every unit sort of has a role, and you know, there's a lot of opportunity to mix and match and use different combinations of units. There's not just one way to play, which is makes it, you know, every campaign different. It gives you the opportunity to do something a little bit different, and you know, tailor it to what you want to do. There are certainly units that are more effective than others or more efficient than others in terms of their cost, but for the most part, I would say almost everything is viable because of the pricing changes around the units. Okay, I think I covered everything as far as the cost goes. Um, yes. So just a couple extra things here. That is, I don't actually see it in here, but I don't actually see the thing in here about the miscellaneous change that adds increased spotting range for recon units, which is really nice. Increased binocular range for officers, which is also very good. So both of those sort of go together in the fact that um, it puts more of an emphasis on recon and on scouting, because again, the engagements are more deadly. You want to be, especially on attack, you want to be you know, having scouting and recon ahead of your main force so that you don't run into anything nasty. This is also an interesting change here, the engineer change. Field engineers, like usually the two-man squad of field engineers, have a repair speed of 2x what the vanilla repair speed is, which gives them an advantage. They repair very quickly. Tank crews repair sort of at normal speed, and then everybody else repairs at much lower speed. So it gives you the incentive, or sorry, it incentivizes the use of engineers and also tankmen, you know, to repair rather than just using a regular rifleman or something to do that, which is, you know, which makes sense. Oh, I'm sorry, here's the part about recon units. I just didn't see that when I was reading through. Uh, yeah, and this last thing here, bigger resource income that increases with time. It just adjusts a little bit the scaling of the economy in the game. As the campaign progresses, the later you get, the more resources you get, which makes sense because you're trying to replace more expensive units, namely tanks, which is a nice feature. It does really make you feel like you can always claw yourself out of a bad situation economically, because you eventually get those higher returns later on in the campaign. One other thing that I think I skipped over as well is that salvaging units, so repairing and salvaging units, is not an effective way to feed your economy like it is in the vanilla game. You get very little resources from selling captured salvaged units. So if you want to capture something, you know, you really want to be doing it for the intent of you using it rather than just to you know, to sell and increase your econ. I think this is a good change, and then the income and the pricing of the units is all balanced around this in according. So like in the vanilla game, you know, you have such an incentive to repair and sell units on the field after the battle is over, so that you can get more manpower. And those figures are greatly reduced in Conquest Enhanced, so it really sort of incentivizes you to use your own units. Units from your faction, I guess, that you're purchasing, or if you're going to salvage a unit, that you actually then turn around and use it in combat rather than just repairing it and selling it. Okay, I think I covered everything here, so let's move on. Alright, we're back in the campaign screen. I've already pre-selected all the options, but I will go through these quickly. If you've watched any of my other videos, I do go through a little bit of of each one of these. I do want to also mention the fact, the reason that I'm playing as the Soviets, in my opinion, I think they're the most difficult early game faction to play as. They really ramp up well as the campaign progresses and they get access to some of their better performing tanks. But early on, it can be a little bit rough to play as the Soviets. I think you're generally outclassed in almost every way over Germany, so it can definitely be pretty tricky. So I'm going to use this as the faction for the for the purposes of this video. We're going to be playing on just the Eastern Front maps against Germany. Like I mentioned in the previous segment, this is the health and health difficulty slider. This is basically the vanilla setting here, where it says vanilla, and you can gradually adjust it up to the CE Conquest Enhanced health setting. This is, like I said before, the CE setting is how the game is meant to be played, but if you need something a little bit easier to get you started, no shame in going down to normal or vanilla, or even noob just to get your feet wet and not get discouraged. The Econ and AI Army size slider, this was changed a little bit in the Liberation DLC release. This used to be just like standard, low, high, and very high, I think, and it's been changed around. The default economy setting that Conquest Enhanced is balanced around is actually high, and if you go to very high, it's slightly easier. If you go to the lower settings, it's slightly more difficult. So keep that in mind. It's not a huge change, but it is a slight variance in difficulty. And then campaign size, for me, I always play large because you can get it done in about 25 to 35 missions, depending on how many wins or losses you have. And I'd say you can even get it done sooner than that, maybe 20 to 30 instead of 25 to 35. Very large, it takes too long for me. Medium, I don't think that you get into the late war enough. You're pretty much finishing it right as the late war is coming around. So I guess if you're not interested in playing late war, then that's an option for you. Okay, let's get into the army selection. Okay, so I want to avoid this becoming just a unit rundown, or sorry, a roster rundown of the Soviet tree, but I will sort of speak more generally about the units and why I think they're good or bad, or the choices that you can make. One thing to note is that there are some changes from the vanilla tree and the way that it works, especially in the amount of units that you get with each call-in stage. As we'll see as we go along. And you also get, I didn't actually mention this when we start, you get a fair amount of points to start with. This is also a change from the vanilla game, where you don't start with a ton of, you do start with more research points in Conquest Enhanced than you do in the vanilla, but then you get less incrementally, but you get them sort of in spurts, so you get a good amount at the beginning, and then with each mission you might get a few here and there if you're not choosing the research bonus missions, and obviously in that case you would get a big boost of research points. And then at the mid-war period, transition period, which is after day 8, you'll get a big influx of research points, and then after day 16, when you go into the late war, you will get a big influx of research points. So with that in mind, we're going to go through and select a few of the units to build our initial army composition out. I am not going to pick anything again that is particularly early game focused. I want to select my units so that as if I was going to be playing the full campaign. So we get a few freebies here by default, the Smoke Barrage and the Call-in Stage 2, so we'll go ahead and grab those. I will note here, right off the jump, small defenses. This is an excellent upgrade to take by the time you reach day 2 for the defense. So either you can float 1 point, you can spend 13 out of 14 points, or if you get one on your first attack, you can keep it and research for this. I think this is an excellent must-have upgrade. Almost, if you can grab it by the time you get the first defense, it's very, very useful. It doesn't cost you anything, doesn't cost you any manpower, and the friendly units that you get with this are very useful. I won't touch too much on this whole part of the tree, other than you can tell that there are a lot more options for off-map strikes. You can see that they have mortars up to, like, in this case we have 180 millimeter super heavy artillery strikes, rocket strikes, air strikes. I won't go into too much detail here, but you can see the progression and how much it costs to, research point wise, to advance through the tree and increase your army size. So we'll skip down. I want to actually start with the infantry first, so I'm going to skip past some of these things. For me, I almost will always take just at least some level of basic infantry. The tier 1 infantry for me are not great as combat effective units. So we're going to go ahead and at least grab this rifle squad. We could just spring for the rifle squad with the DP-27, so the squad LMG. But for now, I think I'm going to leave that out. This is quite good option, or still is quite a good option, but maybe the 2 research points could be spent somewhere better. So maybe we backtrack and grab this at the end. But for now, I'm just going to grab this rifle squad. I'm also going to grab the recon squad. As I mentioned in the overview, the recon units get a big boost to their spotting range, which is very, very, very useful. We'll be able to demonstrate that when we get into the game. For me, I almost always take the recon squads if I can avoid it, or sorry, if I can swing it. And for me, I always prioritize it. But obviously do what you want. So we will move out of the infantry. So we've got our mainline infantry and we've got a recon unit. Both, we could check those 2 boxes off. I'm going to skip the support weapons also for now, and we're going to jump down to the vehicles. I'm sorry, we're going to actually start with the anti-tank guns, and then we'll move to the vehicles. So the biggest thing, in my opinion, to keep in mind when you're deciding about when to spend your AT gun research and which units to purchase is that you always want to try and outpace the opposition when it comes to your anti-tank gun tech. This seems very obvious, but it's extremely important, because at the end of the day, vehicles and tanks will be the most threatening units for you, especially on defense, to deal with, because if you don't have anything to deal with the armor, or you're bouncing shots, you really want that first shell to hit and penetrate the tank that it's shooting at on the first shot, because it'll shock the crew, it'll do some internal damage, and you don't want to be stuck in a situation where you're trading shells with the enemy, especially on defense, because your units, you have fewer, are more valuable than the AI, who can send 10 tanks at you at once. So with that said, the Soviet AT gun choices very early on are not the best. So you have a couple options. We can actually grab this 45 millimeter, which is pretty respectable. It has a better, or has more penetration than the stock one, the M1942 model of the 45 mil. It's pretty good. 2 research points is a little bit steep, but it's something that we can consider. We also can consider just going down this tree and grabbing, something like one of these 76 millimeter guns. These are not bad early on. They have very slow reload speed, but they get the job done. They have enough penetration to deal with early German tanks. The real star of the show, though, is this one, the 57 millimeter ZIS-2. This thing is very, very good, and when you can grab it, and it will scale quite well for you into into the later stages of the game. You can probably use this into the late game. The 76mm S3 and then eventually the 100mm BS3 are both quite good, but this thing, for me, it is really strong. With that said, I'm going to go ahead and select here the 45mm M42, and then I'm also going to take the 76mm M1933. And the reasoning for that is that when we'll describe this a little bit more detail later, is that since this gun fires so slow, it has a lot of penetration, but it does fire slow. We like to keep some of the smaller caliber AT guns with it to deal with lighter vehicles and to follow up on the damage that the bigger one is doing. So it keeps it keeps it from being overwhelmed. For now, we'll stick with this, and we maybe, if we have points left over, we can come back and get this 76mm F22, which is which is a pretty solid gun. We can then branch down and get an artillery piece. Tube artillery is quite good in Conquest Enhanced. The same rules sort of apply from the vanilla game, that for me the calibers between 105mm and 150mm are sort of the best sweet spot between reload speed, accuracy, and damage. The Soviets have a couple really nice artillery pieces, but we're not going to grab one right now. They do cost a lot in terms of pop cap. Most of them cost 30 or more. They eat a lot of munitions, and it's very difficult to get their pop caps worth of use on defense. So for that reason, we're going to skip buying any artillery pieces at this stage, right now at the beginning. But it's definitely something we want to look at as we move through the campaign. The other option here are these light field guns. The Soviet one, for me, is probably the least effective of the three factions. The US one is very good, and the German one is also very good. The Soviet one, for me, leaves a little bit to be desired. It's definitely a step below the other two. It's still very effective, though, at what it does. I think for now, I think we're going to leave this at home, but it's especially if you're playing Germany or US, I would definitely recommend taking the 76mm. Actually, for them, they're both 75mm. This thing is very good, even with the Soviets. But I have something else I want to do for this particular one, or this particular playthrough. So we're gonna keep that off the table for now. Now we go into the vehicles, and so to summarize, we've checked another box. We've gotten ourselves an AT gun, which is very important. I want to go down to the vehicles next, because there's sort of two roles that we want to fill, especially early on. We want to have a light vehicle that is useful, that has some mobility and is useful purely against infantry, because it allows us to move it around on the flanks and mop up things that are trying to flank us. And we obviously want some sort of tank that we can use, as a tank. So the choice that we have to make in the Soviet tree is which tank tree do we want to go down, because you have the T-34s here, and then you also have the KVs down here. You can try and swing both, but it can be very difficult, I think, to deploy both because of the research costs associated with going down both trees. By all means, I think they're both very viable. They both have strengths and weaknesses. The Soviet tanks in general are quite good. The KVs, especially if you get them early, really, really good units. You can basically cruise through the early game if you spend a lot of your points and you go right for the KV right out of the gate. However, in this playthrough, we're going to actually use the BT series tanks. This is just a personal preference for me for what I want to do for this particular playthrough. By all means, you can do whatever you want. I think at the very least, we'll take the BT5. We have a few more points that we want to keep to spend on other things, but the goal, if we were playing this out, would be to say, okay, we want to go down the T-34 tree. We want to take the T-34 and T-34 chassis vehicles. That's going to be our approach. So we're going to start in the BT line. So we skipped over a few things. We've got our tank. We did not get any sort of light vehicle, but I will pick that up now. So we have two options really for this. Well, we have a couple options, I guess, for the Soviets. You also have the Lend-Lease tree, which I did not mention. For me, I'm not a huge fan of this, but I've also never used it before, so maybe I'm overlooking it. It looks really fun to try out, but for me, I just haven't ever done it. So I'm actually going to grab this T40 M1940, which is basically just a tracked two-man light tank with a 50 cal as its main gun, with the eventual intent to grab the T60 here, which I think this thing is very, very good at the role that it's for, which is to sort of deal with flanking infantry and some light vehicles. The other option is to go through these to get the command car. The BAs are quite good. For early in the game, they have a nice gun on the top, and they're very quick and mobile. So we still have, after we've selected the T40 and the BT2, no, BT5. Did we get the BT5? Yeah, we got the BT5. And we got our AT gun. The last thing we're going to pick up is the Dishka. The Dishka is awesome. This is, as you would expect, it's notorious. It's got a reputation as being a heavy hitter, and that is very, very true in Conquest Enhanced. I really like taking MGs, tripod MGs, support weapons, because they're very, very effective for their cost. The Dishka is actually the most expensive. It costs 4 pop cap, and I think it's almost 200 manpower to bring it in, but this thing almost always pays for itself against infantry. So a few other things I did not grab, but I will point out. The flak guns for any faction are very solid. Eventually, you'll also need something to deal with anti-air. For me, that's best dealt with a vehicle, something that's tracked. But for instance, on the Soviets, you can get the 25mm flak gun on the back of this truck, on the gas truck, and that's quite good. The mortars are good, but they're not good early. The issue is that your army size early on is too small to support the mortar on defense and on offense. I think it doesn't do enough to justify its cost, and it absolutely chows down on ammo. Like, you have to bring at least one dedicated ammo box per mortar, and early in the game, it's very difficult to keep that going. So it's a great pickup mid game and late game, especially on defense, because you can set it and forget it. You don't have to. You give it an ammo box, you put it in a good spot, you dig it in, and you don't have to worry about it anymore. When you get a bigger army, you as the player, your attention span gets stretched very, very thin, and it's nice to be able to have a unit that you don't really have to pay attention to. A few other things that we definitely want to put on the wish list that we haven't already talked about. The field engineer squads are very good. AT and AP mine engineers are also very, very effective, especially early in the game. Anti-tank mines are awesome. They almost always will pay for themselves if you put them in good spots. The units to bring them in it's like 100 manpower. They're very, very cheap. So it's just about this upfront research cost investment. Flamethrower infantry also good, but it gives you a lot of tools to play with on defense specifically. Okay, I think I covered most everything in the tech tree here. Let me just scroll through it, just make sure that I didn't leave anything out. But we got our tank, we got our light vehicle, we've got an AT gun. We actually got 2 AT guns. We got a heavy MG, and we got some infantry, and we got a recon unit. And we took all the freebies, which is also very important. So we'll go ahead and click that. The next thing that we want to do, actually, and you can actually do this first before you spend any money, or I'm sorry, research, is to pick the mission you're going to do first. Early on, the very first one, I almost always want to take a research mission because I want to get more units. I want to get more units available to me to pick from, like the engineers, like a better tank, like potentially better infantry, more call-in stages, off-map call-ins, things like that that we need tech to get to. As the game progresses, though, we will need things, we will need munitions and we're going to need manpower. So you want to be picking missions that are are keeping all 3 resources, manpower, munitions, and research, up to par. You don't want to be lacking in anything in particular. If you are going to be lacking in anything, you don't want it to be manpower, because if you don't have any manpower, you can't fill an army, and it's going to be a problem for you. Alright, I'm going to very quickly build the initial starting army for us. We have 2 call-in stages at 70 pop, and we'll pick it back up and I'll go through the choices that I made and why.